Hello. So we're gonna look at an interview that Andy Burnham had yesterday, and we're gonna see what he's saying. It's a bit of a lengthy video, but I'm gonna be quiet through most of it because I'm just gonna take it all in. I have not watched this yet, so we're gonna have a look at this for the first time.
Do you want to be leader of the Labour Party?
I will take that fight as high as I can take that fight.
Do you have confidence in Keir Starmer as Prime Minister?
I do have confidence in him as a person.
Do you want Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, to come and campaign with you?
I think the country does need to change.
Do you understand why people are voting for reform?
100%, because my party and other parties have let them down.
And what do you make of Nigel Farage?
Clearly effective,
Twat.
but I just don't agree with him.
I will ask you one more time. This is a pitch for you to be leader of the Labour Party. You left Westminster a decade ago, and you've been pretty critical of Westminster in that decade. Why do you now want to go back?
Because everyone can feel that the country's not working, it's not where it should be, and politics isn't working. I felt that 10 years ago in Westminster. I could just see that the place doesn't work for people here. I felt that as the MP for Lee, nearby, fighting for investment in this borough, trying to bring it back up. I felt it fighting for justice for the Hillsborough families, and I also felt it as mayor actually during the pandemic when I was fighting Boris, who was trying to treat people in Makerfield and Greater Manchester as second-class citizens. That's the thing that made me leave the way that it works. It works for some people in some places, but not all people in all places. And I tried to build something different in Greater Manchester, a new politics, different way of working, place first rather than party first, more about problem solving than point scoring. And look at the results. We create that new politics, and Greater Manchester today, the fastest growing city region in the UK. I'm so proud of that. It's a team thing. We all pull together in Greater Manchester, and I think, if I could say this, the country needs more of that approach. There's only so many things I can do though as Mayor of Greater Manchester. I have done something to reverse the Thatcher legacy, which was the deregulation of buses. And I remember that growing up here when the orange buses that we had were taken off us, broken up, and everything became way too expensive. I have put buses back under public control and made them more affordable to people here. But I want everything to be affordable to people here in the Makerfield constituency. I want energy to be affordable. I want housing to be affordable. I want water to be the same and not have a situation where we end up with sewage in the rivers and seas. I want transport to be much more affordable, train fares to be lower, like the bus fares that we've got. So I can't do all of that from my role as Mayor of Greater Manchester. We've taken Greater Manchester up to a degree, but more change is needed if it's to get where I want it to be.
To be clear though, you can't do any of that as MP for Makerfield. You're going to have to become leader of the Labour Party and then Prime Minister. So I'm going to ask you a pretty direct question here. It really is a yes or no. Do you want to be leader of the Labour Party?
Firstly, I'm not presumptuous about anything.
Of course, but I'm asking a question about
question
what?
for
You should
other
say
people
yes or
in
no.
many ways, as to whether or not they think I could go forward. So that's firstly a question for the people of this constituency, and I'm purely fighting to be their member of
But this is
Parliament.
clearly bigger than a by-election. This is clearly not
I will
about...
answer your question. I have spent my whole career fighting for people here. That's what I've done, and I mentioned the campaigns that I've been involved in, fighting as well for people affected by infected blood, which was a campaign I was a big part of when I was in Parliament. I've always fought against injustice. I've always fought for ordinary people. I've fought for the north of England, but I've fought, if you like, for people everywhere, and I want to see the Midlands and the Southwest and get the fair deal that everywhere should have. So to answer your question, I will take that fight as high as I can take that fight, because I think the country does need to change if it's to work for all people in all places. We have currently an economy that works for some, often those for whom life is already very good, but it doesn't work for people for whom life is hardest, and that has to change. And if I
do sense I sense your reluctance, and I understand you don't want to look presumptuous by saying I want to be Prime Minister. But I mean, what are we doing here, Andy? If you don't want to be leader of the Labour Party and you don't want to be Prime Minister, what is all this about? Because politics has essentially come to a standstill. Until we know what's going to happen in this by-election, the Prime Minister is currently a sitting duck. And until you tell the country what you want to do, we're not sure what's going to happen next.
Well, I've indicated that always in my
Good
role
point.
as mayor that one day I will seek to return to Westminster. So I'm saying that now, and I don't know whether people here feel that that's something they want to support. But that is the first stage, and I'm not getting ahead of myself. I am focused on what I'm doing here in this by-election. What comes beyond that in Parliament, again, is a question for people in Parliament. It's a question for the country. But if I could, just let's get to the heart of this by-election campaign. People are struggling, number one, and number two, politics isn't working. Thursday's local election results of a week past, they were just a kind of a cry for change.
Let's be specific on that then. So what has this current Labour government got wrong?
Well, no, I'm just going to give you, if you don't mind, a longer answer. I think Britain started on a path in the mid-1980s that is the path that has led us to where we are today.
It's going back a bit.
It started with deindustrialisation in these parts. I was growing up here, the miners' strike, this was a mining area, and that was devastating, as well as the loss of other industry. Deindustrialisation, deregulation, the buses that I mentioned, privatisation, where life's essentials became less affordable to people, energy, water, those other things that I mentioned. And all of that has taken us to the point where we are now, where people just feel things aren't working, things aren't affordable. And that's the path that we're on. And for me, we need a different path that puts those things back under public control, makes them more affordable. And that is the main question in this by-election. Are people happy to stick on the path that Britain's been on for 40 years, or do we want a new path? And it's a bigger question, actually. And I think it's a really important thing for me to say to you. This is a different by-election. We've not had a by-election like this before.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? This clearly isn't a by-election you're treating as to become Member of Parliament for this area. You're making a bigger argument about the country. And therefore, I will ask you one more time. This is a pitch for you to be leader of the Labour Party. I mean, I don't quite understand why you don't want to say yes to that answer.
It's a pitch for me to be the
I
Member
can
of
understand
Parliament, and I'm not
because
gonna
he
get
doesn't want
ahead
to.
of that.
Yeah, I was
But
just
what
going to
I
say
did
he doesn't want to
you,
get ahead of himself,
given,
saying, "Yeah, I'm
what
going to be
I've
Prime
learned
Minister,"
about
and
the
then he
things that are
loses
wrong
the
with this
by-election
country in
for
my political
Makerfield.
career, the way it doesn't,
And he'll look a
the
bit like
political
an
system
idiot.
doesn't work for people in this part of the world. I will take that fight on their behalf as high as I can go. But it's not for me to say, oh, now I'll take it right to the top. It's for others to decide as well whether I'm the person to lead that fight forward. But the first and foremost issue I've got to kind of confront is, are we going to stay as we are, where Britain just doesn't feel like it's where it should be? I want this by-election to be a change moment for British politics. Let's let some fresh air in. I don't want to be on a doorstep kind of saying to people, reform this, Lib Dems that, Green the other. I want to focus on what I'm saying to them about what I think needs to change, and then listen to what they think about that, and then from there see if we can build a different approach to politics.
The ideas that you're talking about.
Oh, sorry about the advert.
Already, you look at the financial
You might get
markets
another set of
on
adverts
Friday, are pretty
during
spooked by
this,
it. There's already talk
which I apologise
that
in
the
advance
ideas
for.
that you've got are going to involve a lot more public spending, potentially higher taxes. What are you going to do if you get as high as you want to get to, and let's say that's Prime Minister? What are you going to do when the markets turn around and say, whoa, we don't like any of this, and we have a situation we had with Liz Truss where the economy starts to falter?
Number one, I have never said you can just ignore the bond markets. Number two,
Well, didn't you say we shouldn't be in hock to the bond markets?
I said that politicians have placed Britain in hock because of the way in which we lost control of our finances and public spending. And that goes back to what I said to you before, when we, if you like, handed away control of energy, water, housing. That has left Britain in a weak position when it comes to public spending. How can you control public spending if you're chasing rents in the private rented sector through the benefits system. How can that be done? So, you know, I've quite clear, let me say this really clearly, I support the fiscal rules. There needs to be a plan to get debt down. But beyond that, we need to change politics and take the turbulence out of British politics, because that is a cause of uncertainty that then has that impact in the markets. I'm proposing here a new approach to politics, like we've built in Greater Manchester, more long-term, more collaborative, and from that platform you create longer-term public investment plans for the country to retake control of public spending, because you've got further control of housing, energy, water, and all the rest of the things that I mentioned. And that is a really clear answer, and I hope people in the markets and beyond will hear it, because
you're clearly worried about the markets, and some of your supporters have said, "Oh, the markets are going to have to fall into line if Andy Burnham becomes Prime Minister." I can tell that you're conscious of getting that message out, and again, it points to the fact that you are really thinking about being Prime Minister, and that's what this is all about.
Just pointing to what I've always said. I said, you know, you can't ignore them, and I never would have believed that you could. Of course you can't. And also that you stick to fiscal rules. There's got to be fiscal discipline. Let me just say, let me say, this is important.
Okay.
I've run Greater Manchester for practically a decade. We have got rock solid public finances in Greater Manchester, but we've got an economy that's growing at 3%. Now that's my track record when it comes to these things. I'm actually putting forward a big answer to this problem of Britain looking over its shoulder. The fact that we don't have sufficient council and social housing in this country, as you know probably better than anybody, that means that we don't have control of the benefits bill, because, as I said before, you're chasing rents in the private rented sector. The failure to have a sufficient public housing stock causes Britain to spend so much on social failure. And it's these things that need to be put right. I'm actually putting forward, you know, as somebody who's been, if you like, outside of the confines of Westminster, some new thinking, some fresh thinking. I'm saying to you directly, the path that Britain has been on for 40 years, in my view, has been the wrong path. It's taken us to this place where people can't afford life's basics. They can't afford a few pints at the weekend. They can't afford a holiday. And that's why they're saying to politicians, do better. This is not good enough. And they're right to say that.
Yeah.
I'm saying there's a new path here, new politics to build a new economy for Britain.
I mean, a lot of what you've just talked about there is not in the current Labour manifesto. There's going to have to be a general election, isn't there? If you become leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister, you're going to have a general election pretty quickly. Because all the things you talked about, and I'm sure lots of people will agree with, particularly on nationalisation and on housing, that is not in the current Labour manifesto. No one voted for what you've just been talking about.
No, that's ridiculous, because
I don't agree. I mean,
Conservatives went through how many Prime Ministers?
No,
I don't agree with that. They don't need to do a general election.
There's so much there that you can
If he
build
becomes-
in the
if he
manifesto,
becomes-
but bring through.
If he becomes a new Prime Minister, he doesn't have to go through a general election. He can just do these things that he's saying, because the old manifesto was what Keir Starmer and his team put forward. He'll be a new Prime Minister with a new team of people, and then they'll just do their own thing. They're not break. It won't matter to him or the new team that's behind him if they break manifesto. That's how I look at it anyway.
So you don't think if you became leader you would need a general election?
Bring through the strongest version of what's there.
So you don't think there needs to be a general election to put your ideas forward to the country?
No.
I think what I'm saying, you know, I am building a different conversation here with the public that is actually a new one. You know, as I've said to you, that my rules in this campaign are: you knock on every door, you have a conversation on every doorstep. You don't spend your time point scoring against the other parties. You listen to what people are saying, and then you say, this is what, you know, we believe should be done. And then from there, you know, we start to build back some trust in politics. And always, if you're going to do something that's not, you don't have a mandate for, of course, you know, you always have to make sure that there's public consent for what you're doing. But I want this to be really, really clear. I'm building a new politics, and let me just explain this.
Can I ask you
Dan, I do need that space to answer some questions because it's
Absolutely.
important that
Let him answer
to,
questions.
just
Stop talking
describe
over it.
what was a
There you
real,
go.
a change moment in my political journey. I stood for Westminster 4 times under the first past the post system, and then in 2017, when I stood for the first time to be Mayor of Greater Manchester, under a proportional system, I realised that you had an incentive to knock on every door because you might be able to get a second preference from somebody who was a Lib Dem voter or a Green. And I used to say to them, oh, well, okay, if you support regulation of the buses, maybe you could consider giving me a second preference. And the thing about that was, it finally aligned the conversation on the doorstep with what people want from politics, which is about problem solving first and foremost, not point scoring. And for me, building a different political conversation in the country then allows us to start thinking of different long-term solutions. I think Westminster politics has served people very badly indeed.
Are we talking about electoral reform here?
I support it.
Especially in the last 16 years.
A different conversation.
Okay.
Look, but that, to then go on to answer your question, would require it to be in a manifesto and endorsed at a general election. So I'm not saying that things should be done for which there is not currently consent.
One of the big questions on the economy, before I move on to the by-election specifically, one of the big questions on the economy, and a lot of people will say, the Brexit referendum was a huge turning point, and part of a lot of the problems we're having with the economy.
Big mistake that
go
was.
back to that point. I know you're making
Let's
a
hear what
wider
he
point
says
about the
this,
1980s, but specifically on Brexit, are you in favour of rejoining the European Union?
I've said in the long term there is a case for that, but I'm not advocating that in this by-election. In fact, what I am saying is focus now domestically. Britain has got to focus very much on the here and now and the issues that are affecting people. These are the things we need to focus on rather than getting trapped in a debate about the EU. We've got to focus domestically, sort out Britain, and that has got to be the first priority.
This is going to be a really tough fight for you. The Reform are picking up a lot of support here. Do you understand why people are voting for Reform?
100%. And I'm not in the business in this by-election of sort of...
Why do you think they are?
Of point scoring, because my party and other parties have let them down. And it's what I said before, we've got to a point where life has become unaffordable.
Yeah.
And the status quo just hasn't delivered for them.
What do you make?
And they're sending a message, aren't they? And rightly, in my view.
Yeah,
that,
like I've said a few times, they're voting to wake Labour up.
Telling you that this isn't good enough, and it's time for politics to respond to that message,
upset.
rather than, I don't know, promising breakfast clubs or this, that, and the other. No, I'm saying to you, Dan, we've got to now hear what they're saying. This is more fundamental about who is the economy run for.
And what do you make of Nigel Farage?
I've only met him a couple of times. He was perfectly, friendly, and
fascist.
so I don't.
As a politician,
I'm not and clearly effective, but I just don't agree with him. I mean, since you've asked me about him, I'm not going to spend this campaign doing loads of point scoring, but I talk about the change that Britain went on from the mid 1980s. As far as I know, he was an arch Thatcherite at that time, when those policies were doing terrible damage to these communities here in Makerfield, the deindustrialisation, the deregulation, the privatisation. That was the path that's taken us to this. So I'm not somebody. I get on with people. I try and work with people. But obviously I don't agree with his political views.
No. This is a massive political gamble for you. You are also possibly opening up the route for reform. If you lose the by-election to reform, it's kind of showing the country that there is no viable alternative to reform. And if you win, you open up the path to reform potentially getting hold of the Greater Manchester Mayoral Authority. Aren't you putting this whole region, and potentially the country, in a place where at risk because of your ambitions?
But that's a question that says, therefore, just turn away from things and don't confront issues and just leave it and it'll all be. Well, it isn't all right. Politics isn't working, and therefore the country isn't working. So there's an element of risk, but I've taken the view that the time has come for me to, in some ways, take it on and say, here's what I think. I've been in politics 25 years. I've learnt a lot on a fairly winding journey through politics. I have a view about now what needs to change. I think the path the country's been on for 40 years is the wrong one. So it's a bit of a circuit breaker, if you like, for the political culture in this country. And I think some would say, oh, it's an unnecessary by-election. I'd say it's a very, very necessary one. We need a debate in the political space about deeper issues affecting the way the country is.
You're going to be going up against reform. Caroline Lucas, former Green leader, has said the Greens shouldn't be standing in this by-election to give you the best chance of beating reform. Do you think the Greens should stand aside here to let you have a clear run at this on the left?
Do you know, I'm not going to sort of sit here today and pontificate about what other parties should do in this by-election. That's honestly
That's for the Greens to decide.
Up to them. I
think Labour and the Greens should work closely together to defeat reform. Definitely, I think that.
Point scoring against the others. There's always an
Even
element
your
of
party.
that. But the main thing is being really clear myself in what I am saying and why I believe that hopefully should be worthy of people's
Of course,
trust.
it's looking like
and
Rupert
support.
Lowe,
So
Nigel Farage and
that's
Kemi
the
Badenoch
approach I'm
don't
bringing
want
to
to
this. I
work
think
with each
sometimes
other.
politics falls into disrepute because people don't
So
answer
you should
questions.
forge
They go, oh, but look at them
alliances
over
on the
there."
left.
Well, I'm going to not do that in this campaign.
Do you want Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, to come and campaign with you?
I want
You
the
should
support of
support
any
Burnham,
Labour colleague in the country.
believe
if
you
they
should.
want, if they're on board with
Will
what
he be inviting you up to help you campaign?
let me put it this way. I mean, it's not a traditional by-election campaign. So let's just start with that. And
But
I'm
you both
saying,
want Labour to win,
But
right?
hang on a second. I'm
Yeah.
saying different
You
things
should do.
to a degree in terms of what the government has been saying. Now, if people
I've noticed
are glad that I'm breaking this open and
interviewers
want to
trying
come
to
and
put
join
word
the
in his
campaign,
mouth
then,
a couple of times.
but I'm
so.
not saying everybody must come and join the campaign because it is a different campaign.
So you're not standing on Keir Starmer's record, and therefore it'd be kind of odd for him to come and campaign with you. It's kind of what you're saying.
Well, I'm standing on a call for change, aren't I? I think we need to change Labour to some degree so we can change politics, change the country. And that's my view of the change that I think is needed. So it may not be the settled view of everybody else. And it's going to be tested, isn't it, by the people of Makerfield. So, anybody who wants to come, who's a good friend in the Labour family, I would obviously welcome them to this campaign. But it's to support what I'm saying.
And let me ask you, I have to ask you about the Prime Minister. Straight question, do you have confidence in Keir Starmer as Prime Minister?
I've always worked with him, and I do have confidence in him as a person, and actually
him as Prime Minister. Do you have confidence in him as Prime Minister?
What he has done, I'm about to answer, what he's done. I think the thing I would say is some of the good things the government has done has not, come through in terms of, people's awareness of the big changes, rail renationalisation.
And why is that?
Yeah, communication.
I don't know. It's
Communication.
a hard thing, isn't it, being in politics, getting your message over. Perhaps it's the sense that there isn't a really clear forward story for Britain and where it's going, and that I think is what we've got to really kind of pull forward now. I'm really clear about it. I think Britain's been on the wrong path for a very long time, and what I'm saying is, it's time to step back and sort of say, right, are we going to stick on that, or are we going on a new path for Britain? And I hope that will be the question at the end of the day that defines this by-election campaign.
There are 400 Labour MPs. You're saying I'm the best guy to offer these arguments. Wouldn't Angela Rayner make a brilliant Prime Minister?
Personally, I think
fully
so. Yeah,
support,
I think
all
she
through
would.
my career, I've supported Angela. I'm close friends with Angela. Wes Streeting is an incredibly capable
Wes Streeting said a
politician,
couple of right things, but I feel he's
Keir,
too
as is Ed
conservative.
Miliband, there's so many. I'm not saying I'm the best. I'm not never.
But you are saying I'm offering something that no one else can offer. That's what you're saying.
What I'm saying to you is, I took a very clear view 10 years ago that Whitehall and Westminster don't work for Makerfield. Let me just be absolutely blunt about it. I took that view. It was partly linked to, it was mainly linked actually to the Hillsborough Justice campaign. I remember standing in the House of Commons on the the day after the second inquest returned the verdict of unlawful killing. And I felt a sense of fury, if I'm honest, that day. Because I remember being at the dispatch box and I looked around the place and I was looking people in the eye as I looked around the Commons chamber. And I just asked the question, how could an entire English city have been crying injustice for 20 years and nobody here was listening? How? How does that happen?
That is
Well, I've never had an
unbelievable,
answer
yeah.
to that question because the system doesn't know how to give an answer to that question. But that is kind of what made me leave. I was really clear about that, and I've tried to build something different in Greater Manchester, and I think that something different is working. But we have to bring that approach to the national level if this country is going to get back to where we want it to be. And I think there's a real yearning inside people. We want Britain to be back where Britain always was and where we would expect it to be. And that is that's the sort of emotion that's driving this journey back to Westminster. And maybe it will happen, maybe not. It's up to the people of Makerfield whether it does or not. But I just want to bring everything I've learned on a fairly winding political journey over the years. I'll be the first to accept that, made my mistakes, but I've learned along the way. But I feel I've got a clear take on what's wrong, what needs to change, and I'm, in the most humble way I can do, just asking people here in this constituency whether they're prepared to give me their support to bring some of that change to the national level.
Let me ask you some very quick fire questions.
Or do you have to?
Very quickly. They're not politics related, don't worry. Everton win the Premier League, England win the World Cup.
Everton win the Premier League. And I know people say, oh, that's unpatriotic. Well, I'm just giving you a truthful answer. I'm
That's
Everton
fine.
Football Club all the way. And Everton win
He's
the
a
Premier
toffee.
League. Just imagine that day at the new stadium. It's coming. I can see David Moyes. I can see it. I can feel it.
Football's coming home
I can.
to
It's
the Hill
coming to
Dickinson
Bradley
Stadium.
Moyes. It is indeed. I hope so.
VAR, yes or
Gone.
no? Get rid of
Get rid.
VAR.
Get rid. I'll tell you why. It's killing spontaneity in the ground. I'm a season ticket holder at Everton. Killing spontaneity. You can't celebrate a goal because you think someone somewhere in an industrial unit's going to rule it out.
Very true.
So that's a bad thing. But number two, it doesn't get decisions right. You could put up with that if it then got the decisions right, but it doesn't get the decisions right, and it's not consistent.
I was just going to
Takes
say
a
it's
decision 1 week for
inconsistent.
one favoured team, and then doesn't do it the same thing the next. So it's killing spontaneity. It's not getting decisions right. Get rid.
Let's be quick fire, Andy.
You got me on VAR. I can't do VAR. It was a quick fire.
Bank holiday. I was going to ask you if we should have a bank holiday if England win the World Cup, but what if a bank holiday if Everton win the Premier League? Probably should be a better question. But a bank holiday if England
There's
win the World Cup.
some Evertonians, and I'll give the Evertonians of Makerfield a bank holiday.
You're wearing a suit jacket today and a shirt. I was going to ask you if you became Prime Minister, would you wear a suit? But I think probably the answer would be yes, I imagine.
I have to.
Scrubbed it well.
MPs are a bit smarter than mayors, I think.
Andy Burnham, thanks very much for your
Thank
time.
you.
Really appreciate
Very much.
Oh. He didn't give nothing away too much. I think he's holding his cards close to his chest at the moment. He was quite reluctant to say whether he wants to be Prime Minister or not. I think his first thing that he wants to do at the moment is he wants to win the by-election. That's what he's focusing on at the moment. Then he's probably going to look at the bigger picture then if he does win that. The question rolled up, should the Green Party step down to give Andy Burnham a chance? Yeah and no. I reckon parties of the left should work together. I believe that because the parties of the right all seem to not want to work with one another, or at least that's what they're saying. Nigel Farage has nothing to do, doesn't want anything to do with Tommy Robinson. He wants nothing to do with Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe don't want to have nothing to do with Nigel Farage. Kemi Badenoch's openly said a few times that she has no interest in working with Farage. So yeah, no, if the parties of the left forge an alliance of some sort, then yeah, they can see off reform, definitely. But yeah, we're going to leave it there, and this is the last video I'm posting today, so I'll start posting more tomorrow, and yeah, till next time, take care, see you soon, bye.